Matty Dalrymple is the author of Anne Kinnear's suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. She writes, speaks, consults, and podcasts on independent publishing as the indie author, and of course her famous indie author podcast. I've been a numerous guest over on there. Recently, with her co-author Michael Ronn, they published From Page to Platform: How to Succeed as an Author Speaker, where they pool their shared experience of speaking on various stages and conferences around the world. Today, I'm fortunate to sit down with my good friend and fellow podcaster Matty Dalrymple to talk to her about her experiences and why public speaking is a way to build and grow your author business. Welcoming to the show here is Matty Dalrymple. How you doing, Matty?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Dale?
I'm fantastic. Unfortunately, I didn't let you know ahead of time. I had you off camera. You're going to have to flash that book right back up there because nobody got a
Yeah.
chance to see it since they were looking at my head.
I always take the chance, and knowing that maybe nobody's seeing it other than me, but that's the book that Michael and I just put out at the end of August.
Super proud of both of you. Obviously, I've been a very big fan of both of you. Now, I just want to address with the live viewers right now, where are you watching? We definitely would love to know where you're watching from. So please let us know inside the chat. And what questions do you have for our guest today about speaking as an author? No, nothing's off the table, but let's try to keep it focused on the topic of today's guest here. So, and then if you're watching this on the replay, please feel free to drop any kind of questions, concerns, and comments, and I'll make sure to forward those over to Matty after this. So, Matty, you ready to indulge me on a few questions here?
I always love indulging you, Dale.
Yes, awesome, very good. So here we go. You've been obviously doing some speaking for a long time. How long have you been doing speaking engagements as an author now?
Well, as an author, probably since maybe 2015. I think early on, I probably had a couple of gigs around that period of time with local authors groups, maybe some library events. Um, Before that, when I was in my previous life as in the corporate world, I facilitated what, for lack of a better term, I'll call new employee orientation. It was one of these things where we would go over like the tools and techniques that people can use to operate within the company in a way that's aligned with the company values. And so that was my most extensive experience of standing up in front of a room and having to hold their attention and prepping and reading a room and adjusting as needed as I went. So I segued from that into more author-centric speaking engagements.
Do you think that prepared you for what you're doing now on the Indie Author podcast?
Yeah, well, the Indie Author podcast is interesting. I always think podcasting is interesting, and you could comment on this as well,
Yeah.
because you don't have any sense when you're doing it that there's anyone in the room except you and the guest. So, I hope that I very rarely do live events, but I hope that, once the recording goes out there, then I'll be engaging with other people. Certainly reading the guest and being able to do all those things that I mentioned one-on-one is very important for the podcast. But I think that experience I was describing with the orientation sessions has stood me in better stead when I'm standing in front of an audience on a stage and I have a room full of people in front of me and I need to tell whether what I'm doing is effective for them or not.
Very good. I'm going to go real deep into speaking and hopefully explore a few different concepts and ideas here. But let's take it back just a little bit. I want to hear what your first speaking engagement was like. What was that process? How did you land it, first of all? And what was the experience compared to your more recent speaking engagements?
Probably one of my earliest speaking engagements, and this is something that I think many of your listeners will sympathize with, was doing an author event and planning to do a reading at an author event. I remember going to a bookstore outside Philadelphia, which is where I live, and I was supposed to be doing a reading and answering questions and then signing books for people, and one person showed up. One person. And I think that is only too common, unfortunately. People have busy lives, and I had had a couple of other events in the area, so a lot of my friends and family members who were planning on coming to see me had already come to see me. And I think that the learning from that was you really have to give the same performance whether you're talking to one person or a group of 100 people. Now, your approach might change. Like you aren't necessarily going to continue standing up in front of the room on a stage behind a podium if there was one person in the audience. Maybe you step off the stage. Maybe you approach them. Maybe it's more of a conversation in that case. But in both those circumstances, you always have to address it with the same professionalism. So that was a good early painful lesson I had in my speaking career.
How have you been able to, I mean, obviously you look at a room and you say, one, should be treated just the same as 1,000 or 10,000 and so on and so forth. How were you able to build that mindset? Because obviously you get to a point where it's like you're humbled. It's like, oh gosh, I showed up to this event. There's one person here. How are you able to be so positive about it, I guess is the way I should probably ask.
Well, one really practical way to bring that mindset is that so many events now are recorded, as we're doing here. We're having a live event, but it will be available in replay. And so even if nobody's listening live, other people are going to be seeing it down the road. If you go to a conference and you're speaking to a group, and maybe it's half a dozen people, maybe it's a dozen people or 2 dozen, maybe it's some number that's less than what you expected, and they're recording it, you have to remember, first of all, that you need to serve that 6 or 12 or 24 people, but they're probably not the only audience. And with so many authors' talks recorded, you have to remember that over the life of that time, living forever on the internet, that it might be seen by thousands, tens of thousands of people, depending on the topic and your skill and the reputation you have for presenting that information. So I think that that helps. Just know that it's not only the people who are sitting right in front of you, but then recognizing that it's the people sitting right in front of you that you're serving as well.
So back to the original question. I'm not sure if you'd answered this, and maybe I wasn't paying attention. My apologies. So how did you land that gig?
The authors, which
Yeah,
one?
the very first engagement that you ever did. What was that like? Did you have like a friend of a friend, or was this like an opportunity that came up and you're like, "Ooh, I'll go ahead and do this."
Well, that one, I'm going to sort of step back on that author launch party. It was basically a book launch party, which is a little bit
Okay.
different than your standard speaker engagement,
Yeah.
and switch instead to the experience of doing author readings with a local writers group. And so some of my earliest um, speaking engagements in that sense, and one of the things that we talk about in the book is that speaking engagements are not just the usual suspects. There are also things like author readings, um, local writers groups being a great opportunity to do that. And in that case, the organizer and the other readers are bringing an audience themselves. And so, in the worst possible case, you're at least reading for the other people who are participating in that. And you need to observe all the same etiquette that you would, even if you had the large audience. And that was really just getting tied in with my local community of writers, understanding where those opportunities lay.
So this is very interesting. It's not just about getting on like a conference stage. It's more inclusive of just being available and in the public eye, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah, the whole difference between in person and virtual is something that we dive into it in a lot of detail, and
Mm.
people need to assess which of those they want to pursue based on what their goals are. So, one of the first things we recommend people do is think about what is your goal of being an author speaker. So, some people want to do it because it's potentially another stream of income in their author business. Some people want to do it because they feel that establishing an expertise by having those talks on their resume is going to qualify them for a job or qualify them with a client base that they're pursuing or something like that. Some people are looking for a networking opportunity. Some people recognize that it's an opportunity to go to conferences and not necessarily have to pay for the conference if you're accepted as a speaker there. And some people do it because they like to travel. And so the approach you take is very different. If you're becoming an author speaker because you love to travel, then you obviously are not going to be pursuing virtual events. If you're looking for an opportunity to increase your income, then the efficiencies of being able to share your thoughts from the comfort of your own home, it makes virtual events a big plus. And so, uh, you know, the way you go about that is very different. How you pursue each of those different kinds is different. For example, if you really want to go to conferences, then attending a conference first is a great way to understand whether it's the kind of place that you want to pitch yourself as a speaker.
Very, very, very true. So this is very interesting to see that it's not just so much us going on a stage, more so being on a platform that's broadcast to whether it's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever that might be. I love this. This is fantastic. If there's somebody who is an introvert that's tuning into this and they are just absolutely like, they get the shakes, they get sweaty like I do, they freak out, what is the best first step for that introvert? And also, how can they better understand how this is a good tool to help market their author platform?
Well, I think that virtual is often a good place to start, a virtual one-on-one conversation as you would have for a podcast, because then you can think of it like you kind of have to trick your mind two ways. In some cases, you need to trick yourself into thinking that you have an audience of thousands, and in some cases, you have to trick yourself into thinking you only have an audience of one.
Yeah.
If you're very uncomfortable with that idea, then finding a podcast that has a host that you feel like a personal connection with, and also aligns with the message that you want to get out, is a great way to do that, because it's just more comfortable. It's a more kind of intimate atmosphere. So that can be a great way to start. Some people are comforted by the idea of speaking in front of a group of people they know. And for some people, that's more stressful. Like, I am generally never nervous speaking in front of a group of people I don't know. But as soon as there are people in there that I do know, I tend to get more stressed about it. So think of what's true for you, and find a route that is more comfortable for you. But at some point, this is a little bit tangential, but we have a conversation about the importance of having headshots in the book, and we try to address everybody's concerns, like, do I really need a professional? Do I really need this? Do we really need that? And the last question we address is, do I really need a headshot? I hate having my picture taken. Do I really need a headshot? And we say, yes, you do. Because if you're not willing to stand in front of a camera, you really shouldn't be trying to put yourself in a position of standing on a stage in front of people.
Amen. I can't tell you how many times I have some people that would want to be in one of my videos, but then I ask them, okay, could you be on the video? And they're like, no, can I do this without the camera? I'm like, what do you mean? You're wanting to come on here, but you don't want to be on camera?
Yeah, in this day and age, you have to be willing to be on camera.
Yep.
I can't remember the exact statistic, but even podcasts the vast majority of podcasts publish video as well. And even the small minority that don't publish the video are using video in the conversation. And it's very disconcerting as an interviewer to be trying to interview someone that you can't see. And so that's just something you have to get used to, people looking at you. If that is so uncomfortable for you, then maybe author speaking is not the practical thing for you to pursue at the moment.
I will say this, that I am an introvert. A lot of people just assume that I'm very much an extrovert because I'm on videos and things like that. It's way easier to stuff a camera in front of your face when there's nobody there. Whereas when you're getting in front of an audience, it gets a little bit more stressful and anxiety inducing. But I think with practice and time, it gets easier. Now, yeah. I'm going to start to dig. I'm going to go for some deep cuts here, Matty, because I want to hear what was the worst experience that you had in speaking. And it can't be the last one you talked about. I want to hear how you were able to overcome that specific setback, and what are some systems that you've put in place to avoid that type of a situation again.
I think that a very specific embarrassing one, which is what I know you want, is not coming to my mind, but it will as I talk about this more general thing. But one of the challenges that I encountered early on when I would do talks at libraries or writers group meetings and things like that about indie publishing is I would have a standard presentation I give about the processes of indie publishing and best practices and pitfalls to avoid and things like that. And inevitably, I would say something like, it's important, in my opinion, it's important to not have all your eggs in one basket, or at least that's something to consider. And so here's the benefit of going wide rather than being exclusive to Amazon. And someone would say, well, I have a friend who's exclusive to Amazon and they're making a lot of money. I'm like, you know what? For everything I say, someone is going to know an example of an illustration of why that's not true. And some of the illustrations would be, I might be talking about craft and say, you don't want to, every scene in the story has to serve the needs of the story. And so if you're reading a chapter, you're reading a scene and you can't clearly explain what purpose it's serving in support of the story, you should remove it. And then someone will bring up some like weird side story that Stephen King has told.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, he's Stephen King. He can pretty much do whatever he wants to.
He could smear feces on a piece of paper and people will buy it.
And there are going to be exceptions to every rule, but I think that that what I learned from that is to set that expectation up front. Like now I'm super explicit about saying pretty much exactly what I just said. For everything I say, you're going to be able to find an example of why somebody did something different and it worked for them. And that's fine. But just recognize that if you do this non-standard, non-recommended thing, then you're maybe making life more difficult for yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure you'll probably, this will grease your memory here just a little bit. Not that I remember anything that you've done in particular that was bad. Um, a number of years ago, had landed a speaking gig at a conference that was down in Florida. And this was a number of years ago. A good friend of mine had got me connected with this. She brought me in for this kind of like a panel workshop type situation for this author conference. We ended up getting relegated into this back room. And we're talking like there was like a couple of different large ballrooms where everybody was going to, but for whatever reason, our talk was put into this little, like, almost, I wouldn't call it a closet space, but it was definitely like worthy of potentially being a walk-in closet for somebody.
yeah.
And my wife got put into the mix as well. So there's the three of us. And then they had somebody at the front door that if they didn't RSVP for our particular event, they're sending them away. And I'm like, what are you doing? Just let them in. And
Yeah.
I just remember I was just so furious. And then by the time we started, the three of us really hadn't sat down and discussed what we were going to talk about. We were just going to go ahead live and just riff it. That was a train wreck. It was bad. I've got some video of it somewhere. Like, it's a very poorly shot video, so that's why I never released it. But oh my Lord, it was one of those instances. And I think there was a dozen people at least in the room, but we could have easily, I would say, brought in 50. It would have been a tight fit if we did 50, but they just kept sending them away. So this was one of the lessons I picked from this was, when you're doing any kind of in-person events, always ask the organizer what their expectations are and where they're going to place you and how long you're supposed to go and things like that. For this one, it was just like, hey, you want to come speak? Yep, I'll do it. You don't want to just do that.
Yeah, that is great advice. And the very comparable situation that I can describe is having gone to a conference. I can't even remember. Let's just say the topic was indie publishing. Why not?
Yeah.
And there was, it was during the cocktail hour, and there were four people who were designated as speakers kind of during the cocktail hour. And whether I just assumed this or I read it, misunderstood it, I don't know. But what I thought was that there was going to be like the cocktail party, and we would have tables or something like that. And people could come up with their drink and chat with us about indie publishing. There was one person who was talking about website design. I can't remember the third one, but the fourth one was something like um, using scotch and bourbon in fiction. So that's interesting. That would be an interesting cocktail party. But it was almost
What?
exactly how you described it. It was like, okay, where should we set up? And they were like, oh, well, you're in, Podunk conference room down
Right. You're in
the
the
hall.
annex.
And it was supposed to be a panel discussion with four people who were talking about indie publishing, bourbon, websites, and something else. And I thought, if I had known ahead of time exactly what you're saying, if it's not clear to you what the scenario is, now we ended up having the flexibility. We said, can we just kind of make it like we all have little stations and people can come talk to us? And it worked out okay. But understanding the organizers' expectations, understanding the logistics, understanding how many people they expect to come and whether they're going to turn them away or not, and why they would turn them away if they were doing that is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew I'd grease your memory just a little bit there with that one, because everybody has that.
Yeah.
What are the best first steps for any author that wants to consider doing some of these speaking engagements? What would you think would be, something that would be as simple as possible, something that would be easy for somebody to execute that's watching us right now?
Well, I think the very first thing is to understand your goals. And so
Okay.
those example goals I was going through earlier, we have actually a downloadable document on the indieauthor.com, and it's indie with a Y, INDY, the indieauthor.com/platform. And if you go to that page, you'll find all about from page to platform. But if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a downloadable document that's basically the questions that we pose at the end of every chapter of the book. And the early ones are related to what is your goal? And so as I had said, if depending on what your goal is, your first steps are going to be different actually, the first steps aren't necessarily going to be as different as the direction you take it, the direction you're heading in based on those first steps. So again, of getting virtual events like podcast interviews is a great way to step into that because it's low cost, it's relatively low time commitment, although the other thing I would caution is don't take virtual events less seriously than in-person events.
So true.
um, they all have to be treated with the same professionalism. There are a lot more podcast opportunities than there are speaking engagements. I think that's probably true across the board, but certainly for authors,
Oh yeah.
there are just tons and tons of podcasts that are looking for guests, so it's easier to land a gig there.
Yep.
And don't go in with the expectation that you're suddenly going to be commanding thousands of dollars in speaker fees. You have to kind of work up to that, and so
Yeah.
set your expectations appropriately. And you can do that by speaking with people in your community and speaking with organizers and understanding what the organizers are looking for. That kind of groundwork will serve you well through your whole speaking career.
When you get an opportunity that comes across your way, Matty, let's just say, for instance, a conference gets a hold of you and says, Matty, we love what you're doing, love the Indie Author podcast, we love your latest book, From Page to Platform. I got to get that in there, right? Yeah, let's get that lower thirds and pop that up so everybody remembers that. Yeah, exactly. So when somebody approaches you, how do you treat this? How do you know when it's the right opportunity for you? Because obviously opportunities are plentiful out there, but not all of them are probably going to be fortuitous, if you will. So how do I kind of vet those, or how do you vet those out?
Well, I think it's helpful to go into it with a pre thought out idea. So early on, I did not have money making as a requirement because it was more that I was trying to get my name out there to establish expertise in the various areas that I would speak on and to drive sales to my books. And then I got to the point where, as I was assessing my author business as a whole, I realized to make this worth my time, I really need to be charging for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so if somebody approaches me with an offer that doesn't include payment, then there are other things you can assess. It may
Yeah.
be, oh, I was going to that conference anyway, and they're not going to pay me, but they're going to let me go to the conference free. That's practically like getting paid.
I
Or
like free.
yeah, free is great. And,
Yeah.
the benefits you gain from that could far outweigh any monetary payment you could get for having done that speaking engagement. Consider things like who else is going to be there. Are there going to be other speakers or other attendees that you're going to have an opportunity to meet in person that you wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to meet? If you know those things generically in advance, then when those requests come in, you don't have to be fumbling with each of them as if you had never been asked before. If it's a conference on the other side of the country and, they're expecting me to get there on my dime and not going to pay me, then it's an easy no.
Mhm.
I say it's an easy no, but it's always hard to say no when
Yeah.
those kinds of opportunities come in. And so I think that's why it's important to think through them in advance so that you're sort of prepared to make the professional choice to turn certain opportunities down if they're not aligning with your goals.
You mentioned something about expenses. What are some of the expenses that someone could probably expect when they're going to an in-person conference?
Well, always check these things, but I think that the most common sort of trifecta of things for a conference organizer to cover would be, uh, well, there's the payment option. Are they paying you or not? And then in terms of covering expenses, the common things would be, are they going to let you attend the conference for free? That's quite common.
Yeah.
Are they going to pay for your lodging, and are they going to pay for your travel? And so if they do all those things, that's fabulous. I know many conferences will like do one or the other, or maybe there are limitations like a certain number of days. They might offer a certain number of days of coverage for lodgings. But always remember that it's all negotiable if you do it professionally and efficiently. And so, as an example, I was offered a speaking engagement in New York. It's an easy train ride from my home outside Philadelphia, and I was offered 2 nights of lodging. But the schedule was that if I was only there for 2 nights, I would have to be traveling on the day of one of my talks, which I definitely didn't want to do because not only is there the chance that I'm going to run into delays, but also the certainty that I'm going to show up cranky and not in a good frame of mind.
Yeah.
So all I had to do was point that out. I said, it would be great. I think it'll be a great, better experience for me, and certainly a better experience for your attendees if I could stay the extra night. They were fine with that.
Yeah.
So oftentimes it's just you pointing out in a professional way that you need something different. Um, I think and then there are, and we actually go into this in a lot of detail. There are a ton of expenses that are easy to overlook. Like someone might say, we're going to pay for your ticket, your travel, and your lodging, but we're not going to pay for you to get from the airport to the hotel, or we're not going to be paying for any meals, or we're not going to be paying, all these other things can really stack up. And
Yeah.
so it's important to take a holistic view of what this is going to cost you if you're having to foot the bill for any of that.
So, so true. And I'm so glad that you guys covered that within the book. And I really need, you gave me access to this a couple of months ago, and I still have yet to sit down and read it, but I promise you I will for sure. But you're right. Where it comes, those hidden expenses, you don't really think about it. Sometimes I think this was a lot my problem, I'd say, early on in my author career was I became very romantic with the fact of like, ooh, I'm wanted. I get to go
Yeah.
to this conference and they're going to give me a free ticket. But then I forgot about things like travel expenses, hotel, food, not to mention time away from your actual business. So if you're normally used to doing writing and publishing and you're pulled out of the comforts of that, guess what? A lot of things are going to kind of fall behind. And this is why I've been so selective with a lot of like the in-person conferences. I had somebody approach me more recently and I had to turn them down. I was like, unless you can be able to cover transportation, hotel, and pay a stipend at this point, I was like, I can't do it. And they were like, sorry, we don't have the budget. I was like, I'm sorry, I don't have the budget either. I can't just donate money to your conference at this point just because I love to be on stage.
Yeah.
You have to be super realistic. And I'm so glad that you guys addressed that in there. But here's what we're going to do. Let's see about transitioning over into the live question and answer here with some of the folks that are here. We've got about roughly 30 people tuning in today. Thank you so much, each and every single one of you. Matty, just real quick, where can people be able to find your latest book, From Page to Platform?
You can find From Page to Platform on all major online retailers, and it is available in ebook and print and AI narrated audio.
Nice. So what, you guys didn't narrate your own book? You and Michael have amazing voices.
We talked about that early on, and it started coming time toward publication, and I got in touch with Michael. I said, I just can't. I did try to narrate one of my nonfiction books years ago,
Yeah.
back when I think microphones were not the tech wasn't as good as it is now, and I had my bathroom draped with like multiple shower curtains and things like that, and I just it's like running a marathon. Recording an audiobook, it's not only time investment, but it's like physically draining.
Yeah.
And we debated about it a little bit, but I know I don't want to fall into the trap of assuming that everyone has the same preferences that I do, but when I'm trying to consume content where it really is just it's consuming information, it's gaining information as opposed to like having an experience as you would want to with a fiction book. I'm fine listening to it by Michelle G from Google Play Audio. And so we just decided that in order to make it available as efficiently as possible in audio, we would do that.
So you guys ended up going with the Google Play digital narration then?
Yeah.
Nice. Now, did you guys try out any other ones at all?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Michael is quite the as you are, loves to fiddle around with the tech stuff. So he had investigated some other things. I had used Google Play for an earlier nonfiction book, and I was real pleased with the results. So yeah, we just went with that pretty quickly, and then we also put that up on Findaway. So that just happened recently. So that audio will be getting out on those other platforms shortly.
Sounds to me like I probably should just pick up the audiobook and start listening to my workouts.
Yeah, I have found that is the way I like to absorb nonfiction content is in audio. So yeah, I'm giving away all my print craft books and things like that because they're like, I really want to listen to this. I don't really want to read it. I want to read fiction, but I want to listen to nonfiction.
I've got an entire shelf full of all of these craft books, and I've probably touched 1% of them. I'd like to get them all off my shelf here eventually, but I want to go over, say what's up to some of the people that showed up here for the live broadcast. Again, if you have any kind of questions here for Matty about speaking engagements in her book, please let us know inside the chat. Author Michael W. Hickman says, I have a great voice actor that voices my 4 novels. I would never think of doing it myself. I'm not going to blame you. I don't think I'll ever probably voice any of my fiction work. How do you feel about yours, Matty? Would you ever voice any of your fiction work at all?
Oh, absolutely not. I have a wonderful audiobook narrator named Victoria Matlock Fowler who has done all my Lizzie Ballard books and several of my Ann Kinnear books, and she does accents. She does a performance. Like I think that that's over the last maybe 5 years. There's been this shift that audiobook listeners want to have a performance, not just a reading. And that's one of the reasons I had a different audiobook narrator early on who had a beautiful voice, but was doing a reading. But Victoria is an actress. She does all the voices. She
Yeah.
does accents. She was kind enough to do several phrases in Swedish, which showed up in one of my books. Go,
Really?
Victoria.
Well done.
Yeah,
You better give her a raise.
I should. I should give her a raise.
Whoops. Hopefully she's not watching this.
Hi, Victoria.
What's going on, Scully? Great to see you join us here. Speaking of people who can narrate their own books, Scully's got a great voice. Esty Houston, how you doing? Hi, everyone. Make friends with the like button. Yes, that would be so awesome. Chuck Garrett, go Buckeyes. Go Bucks. OH. Susan Montgomery, good points. Thank you so much. Oh, Ross Brand, my boy. He's going to be doing the virtual book fair with me this next Tuesday here, folks. He said, great advice about knowing expectations ahead of time. This is a guy that's done a lot of speaking engagements. I've seen him speak a number of times, and he's just fantastic at it. Over here in Ohio, of course, Susan's saying, what's up? Author Michael Hickman says, I've done interviews through Zoom, and that's not nearly as bad as standing up in front of an audience. How do you feel about that, Matty? I know for me, I'm kind of with Michael on this one. You can put me on a Zoom chat, but put me on a stage, I start sweating profusely. It's insane.
I think that you can get an energy in person that is very, very difficult to get on Zoom. Zoom is certainly more comfortable, more relaxing. You can fool yourself that there aren't a lot of people watching you. It's a great way to break in. But I do think that at some point, if you want to be an author speaker, you have to be willing to get up on a stage, even if you're sweating profusely. We even include tips like how to not let people see you sweat profusely. There are certain colors where people are going to see if you're sweating profusely or not.
Don't wear orange.
No, that would be a bad one. That would be a bad one.
Orange is really bad.
Profusely. Yes, it would be bad. And I don't drink. I have kind of unsteady hands anyway, and my hands tend to get unsteadier. Even if I don't feel emotionally nervous, my hands tend to get more shaky. And so I never have ice cubes in my drink, because if you have an ice, you're like, if you pick up a glass with ice and you go, you don't want that.
Yeah.
So there are tips like that you can use, but there is just something about being in front of a group of people that I think everybody should try to experience a couple of times.
Yeah, I bring this up out of experience here. Here's a tip. I don't think you guys had this in the book. Whatever you do not do cardio before you're supposed to go on and speak on stage. I was at Inkers Con a few years ago in Dallas, and fantastic conference, by the way. And I had a talk. Prior to that talk, I got up early, had my breakfast, I went and did some cardio. Now, the problem is, as soon as I'm done with cardio, I'm obviously hot. I'm sweating. So I jumped into the shower, got myself showered off, everything, put the clothes on, boom, right straight over to the stage. And you can go back to the Inkers Con and you will see anytime I reach up my hand and I'm pointing to something, there's just this big saturated orange armpit. And I swear to you, every time I see it, everybody just like, they love the show. They're like, you did great. Your presentation was fantastic. I was like, did you also notice that I was sweating profusely? And they were like, no, I didn't notice that. But yeah, I think from now on, I'm not going to go on brand, or I'll at least put on like a suit jacket to cover up the fact that I'm sweating profusely.
Yeah, a suit jacket or black. You can usually wear black and it
yeah.
doesn't show perspiration stains. So there's a little tip for you.
Good stuff. Ross says, another great live stream. I appreciate that there, buddy. That's me. I'm an introvert. It would terrify me to get up in front of people. Takes a little bit of time and practice for sure. Scully says, hello from Mississippi. Author Tom McAuliffe says, hi from Florida. Jam Cormier says, Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My Canadians watching. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate that. Let's see here. Bill Simone says, Mentor, Ohio. Man, I got Ohio showing up today. We also have Michael Hickman over in Newark, Ohio. I said Newark because that's how it's pronounced over here. Newark. Most people that aren't from Ohio, they go Newark. We're like, what town are you talking about here? Or Lancaster. It's Lancaster. You got to say it right here in Ohio. Sybil says, what's going on from Augusta, Georgia? Jasmine Caldwell coming in from Pittsburgh. Not too far from you, right, Matty?
No, just across the state.
Yeah, there we go. But let us know where you're watching from. You got a kind of questions here from my guest that is regarding some of the speaking engagements. We definitely would love to hear from you. Want to give a big shout out here to my moderator, SD Houston. Shannon, thank you so much for tuning in, coming from Florida Panhandle. I need to introduce you to Shannon one of these times, Matty. I think she would make for a great guest on your podcast.
You are like the matchmaker extraordinaire of the author community, Dale.
What can I say? What can I say? There's a good reason why, shameless plug, Networking for Authors is coming out on October 15th.
You are the guy. You are the guy to be writing that book for sure.
Mike Brondo says, any recommendations for audiobook narrators? A little off topic, but I think we can probably run with this. Matty, what are your thoughts?
Well, I would say it helps to be an audiobook listener. And so if they're audiobooks that you enjoy, check to see who the narrator is. There are platforms like ACX, the Audiobook Creation Exchange, which is affiliated with Amazon, that basically has like a matchmaker service. You can go in there and say, I want a female narrator with a non-distinct American accent that sounds like she's in her 30s with a straightforward but humorous delivery or something like that. There are all sorts of little levers you can pull, and then you can get a list of who those people are that have, the narrators that have submitted their work through ACX, and then you can either put the work out and hope for people to approach you, or you can approach people if you listen to their audition tapes and like it. So I think, as with many, many other things in the author community, start with people that you enjoy as a consumer, as a listener, and pursue whether they may be right for you as the producer of your audiobook.
Very good. I have nothing else I need to add. Word of mouth. That's typically one of the best ways to do it. Word of mouth for sure. Yeah. Nadine Webb's watching from France. What's going on? Big shout out to my folks over in France. Yes, what she said. Yes, very, very good. Oh, by the way, Michael Ronn is the co-author of this book along with Matty. Yes. Unfortunately, he's unable to make today's broadcast, but he knew Matty was going to be able to handle things. So, all right, Tom McAuliffe has got something here. In putting together your talks, do you use humor? Why or why not?
I generally do not lean heavily on humor because I'm bad at pre-planned humor. I think that sometimes forcing yourself into something that doesn't feel natural for you is usually a problem. We were talking about things like clothing tips, and we have a whole list of clothing tips of things you should and shouldn't do. But in the end, we say, but the most important thing is that you dress in something that's comfortable, because you don't want to have to be worrying about, whether your shirt makes your skin look pale or your waistband is too tight or something like that. You have other things to worry about. And I think the same is true for humor. I think sometimes it will just interject itself naturally into the conversation.
Organic.
Organically, yeah. But I generally don't go in with like a pre-planned humor aspect. It's just not me. But I think for people that works for, that can be a great way of rapport building and breaking the ice with your audience.
It's so funny because there have been presentations where I didn't plan on being funny, but then people start laughing and I'm like, I meant for that to be funny, I guess.
Totally on purpose.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, good question there, Tom. And Mike Brando says, thank you for answering. For some reason, I said Mike Brando earlier. That reminds me of Brando from, what was that movie, Idiocracy, where it was the electrolytes drink. I meant to say Brando, but I said Brando. My apologies, Mike. Like Marlon Brando, not Brando. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, and folks, please do yourself a huge favor. Do subscribe to the Indie Author Podcast with Matty Dalrymple right here on YouTube. There is a link inside the chat right now that Shannon Houston just shared with us here. Shannon says, I'm not so funny, so I think it's hard to pre-plan humor. I could probably pre-plan some humor, but it comes off forced, kind of like what you were saying, Matty. Whereas like if I try to like put it in there, some people are gonna be like, whereas when I don't try and everybody's cracking up laughing, I'm like, yeah, I meant to do that. It was totally purposeful. Yeah, it's something else.
Yeah, I think that if you're prioritizing things, then rapport building is a more important thing to achieve than humor. Like making your audience laugh is okay, but making them feel connected to you, I think, is more important. And sometimes if you're forcing yourself into the humor aspect, then it could be undermining the ultimate goal, which is to make that connection.
Yeah, and Tom, I think, is a great example because he is a naturally funny guy. I think that he could probably be able to work that in organically, just
Yeah.
have like some bullet points. For me, anytime I go into presentations, I put bullet points together. I know there's some people that will script everything from top to bottom. I think, gosh, there was a number of conferences I've done, and I remember seeing someone who was a huge influencer, and he's getting ready to go on stage in about another hour. And I was at the MC at the event, and I seen him just talking to himself. And I'm like, there's nothing in his ears. He has no phone near him. And I'm like, come over. Like, you good, man? And he's just like, oh, yeah, I'm just rehearsing this. I was like, you scripted your whole talk? And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah. He sat down and memorized everything point by point by point. And for me, I just like to take it loose and relax. I've got some bullet points. And if I
Yeah.
want to kind of riff a little bit, I'll just go with it. What is your process, Matty?
I have what I think is a good median. Again, if one or the other of the at the end of the spectrum works for you, then go for that. But one thing that's very important is not to read notes. So if people wanted to watch you read notes, then they would just buy your book and they wouldn't need to come to the conference room where you're talking to them about it. The other thing is not to just wing it, because that way lies madness and you will not deliver what your organizers and you have promised to your audience that you will deliver. I think the perfect balance is what I do, which is to have bullets. Like normally, if I'm giving what I think most of us would think of as a normal presentation with slides, my each slide will have 3 or 4 or 5 bullets. And for each one of those, I know exactly what I'm going to say. I wouldn't want to remember every bullet and every slide in order, but all I need to do is see that list, and I can be like, oh, now we're going to be talking about the 5 C's of indie publishing. I can blast through that. That's 5 minutes of conversation. Now here's the next one. Oh, here's the A and B of traditional publishing. I have 2 minutes on that. And so having those prompts, I think, is great. You don't want to be talking to the screen. You want to be talking to the audience. And if all you have to do is glance and look at a couple of bullet points, that will help you to keep your focus where it should be on the audience. And I think that works very well for a lot of people, having those bullets, but not a script.
Good stuff. I love this. Personal stories can be funny on their own without trying to be funny. Well said, Mike. That's really,
Yeah.
really good. Here is one from Bill Simone. He says, during an interview and your mind is going blank, what's the best way to get back on your topic? I know I've got my answer, but I want to hear what you say, Maddie.
Well, one thing I would say is don't be afraid of a certain amount of silence. And so I appreciate when I'm talking to people on the Indie Author podcast, when I ask them a question and they take a couple of seconds to consider it.
Yeah.
So you don't have to feel like the moment the end of the sentence comes for the question that you have to be on it. In fact, it's often better for a number of reasons for you to give it a beat or two to think about it. So if it's a matter of gathering your thoughts, don't worry about it. Take the couple of seconds you need. If you've really just completely lost the train, then it's not out of the question to just say, I'm sorry, I zoned out there for a moment. Could you repeat the question? I have done this as an interviewer. Oftentimes I'll be talking to someone and they'll say something and I'll get stuck on it. Like I get fascinated by the thing they just said and I'm like off there for 5, 10 seconds. And then I come back and I'm like, oh no, they've moved on and they left me behind. And in those cases, I'll say, I'm sorry, but I got fascinated with that thing you said earlier and I missed sometimes just fessing up is the
Yeah.
best thing to do. And that is much easier. I think one of the reasons that doing a one-on-one interview and something like a podcast is great for beginners is that it's much easier to do in that format. Chances are the person who's hosting the podcast may edit that out, but even if they don't, it's not as uncomfortable as if you're standing in front of a room and you're suddenly saying, "I where am I? Who are these people? What am I talking about?"
Yeah, I'm laughing only because I will just say straight up, Bill, it's happened to me so many times because my ADHD sometimes it just breaks off on various paths, and I find myself out in the middle of nowhere going, I'm sorry, what was that question? And yeah, I think Maddie just puts it a real way. I don't think anybody expects you to hit the stage or be in a live interview or a podcast interview. They don't expect you to be as polished as like a Gary Vaynerchuk.
Mm-hmm.
Just be authentically yourself. I think that's going to be the thing is, and don't be afraid to have a little bit of mustard on your face and laugh about it because
Mm-hmm.
that's actually another way to infuse a little bit of humor is don't
Yeah.
be afraid to just have a laugh at yourself. I can't tell you how many times I've been on some interviews and I'd be like, what was I talking about? Like, All of a sudden,
Yeah.
I have dementia right in the middle of answering a question.
Yeah. Or you get fascinated what you're saying and it's taking you down a path, and 30 seconds, 2 minutes later, you've gone somewhere that kind of made sense to you, but then you realize you don't remember what the where that journey started. You have to maybe ask for help to get back to that point.
There have been many times I've been on interviews where I'll go on for a while. You've interviewed me a few times where I go on for a while, and as I'm kind of saying this sentence, my brain's going, "Where are you going, Dale? Where are you going? Where are you going?" And then I finally land on where I'm supposed to be going, and then I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, whew." And then the instances where I'm fully derailed, I'll usually take a beat, or I'll even say to the host or somebody else, like, "Hey, I kind of lost. What was I talking about?" And usually we're right back on track. I know I've done that with you before, Matty.
But it's always good. And those are the kinds of things that make interviews easier because they're more conversational. You probably would not want to find yourself in that position if you were going through your own presentation and suddenly in the middle of a slide you didn't like remember what was going on.
Wait, let's start over.
Yeah. But if it does, just say, oh, just, can I have a moment? I just want to collect my thoughts or something like that. Like, I think that the mistake is trying to fake your way through. And generally the recommendation would be just fess up, take care of it, and then move on.
Yeah.
And don't make a big deal about it. Like I've been to presentations where people have messed up and they recover, but then they keep referring to the mess up. I'm like, don't do that. That's
Stop,
just creepy.
stop
Like we
talking
don't want
about
to
it.
keep, yeah, stop talking about it because we're all fine, but you're making it not fine. And that actually makes me think of a tip that I love sharing for author readings, which is never, never like preemptively apologize, because there's nothing worse than going to an author reading and having someone go up and say, "Oh, I'm not going to be as good as the last person."
Oh,
Why would you do that? Like, that's an awful way to start it out. Like, now nobody's going to be paying attention to you anyway because they are all like, "Oh, they're not going to be very good. I'm going to go to the bar and get a drink." Um, or even worse, getting to the end and saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance to practice that much." Like, how much disrespect does that show to an audience of people? If you have 10 people in the room and you've just spent 10 minutes giving your talk,
you got my
now,
mediocre effort.
yeah, yeah, like why would you even do that? And so, and I think that that generalizes to everything. I think a great example of this is my husband, who's also a professional speaker. Um, I was at a talk and the lectern they had was very low, and I realized I was not first, so I was watching other people do the reading, and the lectern was very low, and so everybody was looking down, which made it hard to hear them, and um, and also you couldn't see their face. So I had a like a copier paper box, and I said, "I'm going to take the copier paper box up and I'm going to put it on the lectern to raise it up so it's like at a more reasonable level." And he said, "Yeah, do that, but don't apologize for it. Don't go up and say like, 'I just need to use this copier paper box.' No, you just like go up, you put the box down, you put your notes on top of it." And I thought that was such a pro tip because nobody's going to care. Nobody's wondering about it unless you make a deal of it. And so I think that's really a good lesson to generalize is don't get hung up on your own issues because nobody else in the room is going to get hung up on them, and don't make them get hung up on it by harping on it.
I love that. That's such a that cracks me up because I know I've been to some of those talks before where someone will take the stage and go, "Ooh, that's a hard act to follow." Like, well, yeah, it was a
No.
fantastic one. Like, why don't you just
Yeah.
go up there instead of saying something? I don't know. I'm such, I'd probably say the extreme opposite. Yeah, that was a good one. You just wait. I'm going to send your eyebrows. Some people are like, "Damn, Dale went there." I was like, "Yep, I did." But I'm just that type of a maniac, and I think some people will probably laugh and appreciate that type of humor. But that's
Mhm.
just my brand, I suppose. Ross
Yeah.
Brand says, question, what are your favorite events for indie authors, Dale and Matty?
Well, I think a great opportunity for indie authors is genre conferences. So
Yeah.
for my fiction, I'm a mystery, thriller, and suspense author. I love going to mystery, thriller, and suspense conferences. I've gone to and presented at International Thriller Writers Craft Fest and Sisters in Crime conferences, local Sisters in Crime events. Um, so I think that, and anything, for any book you're writing, there's some equivalent to that. If you're writing nonfiction, there's going to be some group that's focused on that particular topic of nonfiction. I think if you can find those primarily in-person events that by definition are going to appeal to people who are going to like the topic that you have to share, then that can be not only a great way to pursue all those goals that we talked about that you might have for an author speaker career, but also a great networking opportunity. As you know,
Oh yeah.
king of networking.
Can I say? My answer would probably be very simple. Same thing as what Matty's saying. Just look at something that's going to be niche specific. But as far as my personal preferences go, love me some Inkers Con. Fantastic. It's put together by Alessandra Torri. She's just a wonderful. Every year she tries to make it a very big deal. And she brings in some amazing speakers. And she's always rotating out who she's bringing in. The other one probably would be 20 Books. But now it's Author Nation. That's out in Vegas. Fantastic. It's pretty large. You're looking at nearly a couple thousand people. I really liked Inkers Con because it was a little bit more closely and tightly knit, and you could kind of get more of an opportunity to chat with everybody. Whereas it's like you got 2,000 people, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But those are probably my two favorites. I am looking into, since I'm going to be pivoting into horror going into 2025, I will be looking at Stoker's Con next, and that's actually hosted by the Horror Writers Association. So looking forward to something like that. Great question there. I appreciate that there, Ross. Well, we're starting to get down towards the end of the hour. Matty, you are always, it's a delight to have you here. I don't know if I even had you on the main channel before. So welcome to the main channel. You're usually relegated to the podcast, but now you're getting to the main area here. So with that being said,
main stage.
Yes, you got the main stage. You're the main event today. So with that being said, go ahead and tell everybody where they can find your latest publication by you and Michael Ronn.
Yes, I'll just give one more view of the cover. It's From Page to Platform: How to Succeed as an Author Speaker by me and M.L. Ronn. And you can find it on all the major online retailers in ebook, print, and audio. And if you want more information, you can go to theindieauthor.com/platform, and you'll find more information there. And if you'd like to find out about my fiction work, you can find that at mattydalrymple.com.
Fantastic, Matty. Thank you so much for your time. Hang out inside the green room here for just a second while I go ahead and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. I really do appreciate you taking a little bit of time out your day. If you're enjoying question and answers and interviews and things like this, please let me know inside the comments, because I'm going to go ahead and bring in some more experts just like Matty. She's just an absolute gem, a sweetheart, and a rock star. Go and pick yourself up a copy of From Page to Platform right now, available at every major online retailer. And there's a link, of course, inside the show notes as per usual that you can go ahead and do that. Till later, I want to give a big shout out to my channel members, and we're going to do that with this very next scene here. See you guys later. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Special shout out to my channel members for both the podcast channel and the main channel. Without your support, some projects we do at Self-Publishing with Dale would be much harder to fund. If you want to contribute to the cause, visit dalelinks.com/memberships for details and get your on-screen shout out at the end of each broadcast. Till later, this has been Self-Publishing with Dale, and I'll see you soon.